Hi guys, the title of the title you see on the screen today. Don't forget to like and subscribe and we'll get started.
This story is about a girl who lived in very bad conditions. She had absolutely disgusting clothes. They were very dirty and torn and looked very inappropriate. When people looked at this girl, they definitely couldn't tell that she looked like an earl's daughter. However, in fact, she was just that. But such was the harsh reality of the girl. When she went downstairs to her father's house, she immediately saw nothing new. Everything was the same as always. Her father, completely drunk, sat in his chair asleep. Garbage was strewn around him, as well as many bottles he had single-handedly drunk. He just looked so disgusting that it was even sad to look at it all. Drool was pouring out of his mouth, and he was snoring loudly even. This made the girl even sadder. She told him in a quiet voice that she would leave right now because she couldn't take it anymore. After that, she gathered her things and left the manor. But before she left for good, she looked at him one more time. No doubt she understands everything and also accepts why everyone calls her house a haunted mansion. It was quite expected, for even from its appearance it looked as if only the dead lived there. Ambrose's family home was a prominent one in the gentry area. It was always very famous for its wealth. Yeah, like family in general. However, absolutely everything changed when the girl's mother died. The father started drinking a lot, yelling and even raising his hand on his own daughter. He always called her a useless girl because she didn't help in any way. He also swore at her when he ran out of alcohol and said he warned her to make sure alcoholic beverages were always in the house. The girl was very young then, but her father didn't care. She tearfully asked for forgiveness, but he threw her out and said she might not even come back. This poor girl's name was Lila, and when he told her to bring him more alcohol, she said in a trembling voice that they had no more money. But her father didn't care about that. Then he grabbed her by the head and started beating her very hard against the floor so that she even bled. Layla's father was very lost with grief after her mother's death and eventually decided to drown it in alcohol, gambling, and women. And at this rate, their family business, which they had run as a family for generations, couldn't last a year after their mother died. They were once a very glorious, noble family that everyone respected and appreciated. But eventually, the name Ambrose lost its fortune and ruined the title of a decent family. At this rate, at a fairly early age, Layla had to get a job where she continued to work well into older age. The girl worked as a waitress in a small restaurant, and just after seeing her father again in a drunken state, she went to her job. Layla immediately approached the customers with their order and also apologized for having to wait. She placed a plate on the table with the salad they had ordered, the soup, and the delicious fried chicken. When a man who was a regular customer of that establishment saw this, he said that their food was absolutely always delicious and very tasty, and added that she was an excellent waiter. The girl immediately smiled at him and winked, telling him that she was very happy to hear that and that she was happy to be their waiter. In fact, in order to achieve some financial security in their family, she had spent the last year hiding her noble status and working simply in a military cafe. As the girl headed back to the kitchen after giving her order, she thought about the fact that she had only been able to eat a piece of bread last night, so she was incredibly happy that they would be having a staff lunch that day. When she returned to the kitchen, she was handed another order. The chef said it was for table number 4 and handed her a huge plate of beautiful pasta. When the waitresses heard about this table, they were all shocked because it was the table that everyone nicknamed the Devil's Table. They immediately began to refuse and were not going to take that order, for they had all heard about the man who always came to that table. Layla herself, having heard about the new order, immediately thought about the 4th table, glanced around the hall with her eyes and saw one very handsome man there. Once she took a closer look, she recognized the man as Colonel Sylvester Friedel. As far as she knew, this man was known for his steadfast and cold-blooded personality that kills without even blinking an eye. Sylvester loved fighting in war so much that it was even rumored that he ate human flesh. That's why people started calling him a demon. He was not a noble by blood, but he came from a wealthy family. He had been engaged to various noblewomen in the past. However, Because of his terrible appearance and the rumors that quickly filled the entire society, all his 4 fiancées broke off their engagement to Sylvester. One of the waiters, when he saw this demon, thought that it was completely abnormal to have as many as 4 broken engagements, so he didn't want to take this order for himself either. When the man noticed that no one was coming toward him, he looked toward the kitchen where other waiters were crowding in. As soon as the girls saw his gaze on them, they immediately started screaming in fright and ran inside. But Lila wasn't going to pass up this opportunity, and so she told the cook that she would take that order. The man, hearing this, was very surprised and asked if she was sure, and the girl said she absolutely agreed. She then took the order and walked over to Sylvester and placed his plate of food on the table and apologized that he had to wait and told him it was his food. The man answered nothing to this, but only raised his gaze to look at his waitress. Their gazes made contact for only a second. Then he proceeded to eat and thanked her for bringing it. Lila immediately thought about the fact that she actually knew the truth about Sylvester. He may not show his true identity, but he is actually a very kind person at heart. So she smiled and wished him a pleasant appetite, and then started walking back. The maids, when they saw this, immediately began to call her a poor girl and did not understand how she could even talk to a demon. But in fact, Lila was not at all upset, but very much embarrassed and in love. As soon as the maids saw the way she was behaving, they immediately realized everything and decided that she had very bad taste in guys. She stood behind them and thought to herself that this was completely untrue, for they thought this man was the ultimate tyrant and inhuman warrior. But it was all wrong. It didn't matter at all how hard life could be. Having the chance to even just talk to him would always be the greatest happiness for Lila. When evening came and her shift was finally over, she went home and was glad she could talk to this man again that day. The people constantly avoided the table he sat at and didn't want to serve him, so it was a fairly frequent opportunity for Lila when he came in, of course. Soon she came to her estate and wanted to go inside, but suddenly a man came up behind her and addressed her. He had blonde hair and was dressed very well. As soon as he saw her turn around, he immediately wondered if he should call her Rose. In fact, Lila had been using a false name in the cafe to hide her identity, and when she saw Mr. Volkov, she was very surprised. But he naively stepped closer to her, took her hand, and told her that her beautiful hands were not at all made for such hard work. He turned to her, called her the beautiful Rose, and said he wished her hands were only meant for him to hold. At this point, he started licking her fingers, and when he looked at her, he told her that she would definitely be his one day. Lila looked at him in surprise and didn't understand what was even going on or why he was acting like this. But soon she knocked her hand out of his fingers and said she thought the repayment date they'd agreed on wouldn't be until tomorrow, so he could come the very next day. Mr. Volkov immediately smiled and said that of course he did. However, he had also come just to look at the face of his future wife. The girl really resented this and started yelling, saying that she would never be his wife, so he might as well not even dream about it. He was up on his feet by then and called her his darling kitten and wondered if she had completely forgotten the condition of their contract. In fact, Maximilian Volkov was quite a famous businessman who became famous for issuing loans with incredibly high interest rates. And if someone missed even one payment, that person had to marry him. That's exactly Lila's situation. He was interested in her because of her high status. So under the terms of the contract that had been signed with her father, she would have to marry him if she did not give the last installment. The girl, frowning, said he needn't worry about it at all. The monthly payment would be ready by tomorrow, so he could come back later. Maximilian suddenly began to move closer to her and said that this was all very well, of course, but in her ear, he asked that she make love to him. After that, he started to walk away and said he couldn't wait any longer for the day when he would finally hear the word "I do" in the registry office and begging in bed. He kissed her on the top of her head and also told her that her lower salary had its limits and wondered how much longer she would resist her fate. Of course, Lila didn't say anything back. Then he just turned around and left, saying they'd see each other again tomorrow. Immediately afterward, the girl returned as soon as possible to her manor. She went into the living room and heard some loud talking from there. Walking a little further, Lila immediately saw her father with some women and a lot of alcohol. They were laughing loudly and having fun. Of course, her father didn't care about anything at all and was enjoying himself as if nothing had happened. Lila didn't even say hello to him. It was too hard for her to watch him having fun while she tried to feed their family, so she just went to her room. However, as soon as she opened the door, she saw a very big mess in her room. The closets were open and some items were even lying just on the floor. It really surprised the girl, and she didn't understand what had happened in her room at all. Everything was scattered around, as if someone had been looking for something. Then she shifted her gaze to the far corner of the room and saw that her precious little box in which she had been storing her money had been opened. Lila couldn't believe it. Then she immediately ran to her father and started yelling loudly at him. She knew, of course, that he had done it. The man looked at her in surprise, and the girl who sat in his arms wondered if it was his daughter. Of course, he didn't like the fact that Lila interrupted his entertainment and said that it was unfortunate that this was his loose child, and added that she worked in a military restaurant. When the woman heard this, she immediately laughed and said that she loved their work ethic. But the other girl replied that a job like this could not pay well at all. They started to mock and abuse her, which made Lila feel very uncomfortable. She was silent for a while, and then she turned to her father again and wondered if he had used her savings again. She also said she was supposed to use the money to repay Mr. Volkov for a debt they had incurred. But as soon as the man heard this, he immediately became very angry. He threw the wine glass at the wall next to the girl. He kicked the table and asked who she thought had been raising her all this time. He picked up a bottle and started throwing them around so that the glass flew all over the room. The man continued to yell and wondered if she wasn't ashamed that he had to deal with all those diapers and sheets while she was a baby. He told her not to ask him any more questions like that. Suddenly, the woman tried to calm him down, calling him her lord, and told him it was all right. He shouldn't worry so much. Then the man put his hands down and said that this girl ruined all the fun. He also added that they needed more alcohol, so he offered to go out and buy another bottle. Lila fell to the floor at that moment. She could not believe that her father had really found her money and would find it wherever she hid it, for he was such a man. She worked incredibly hard every day to raise the money, and he ended up just taking it and spending it in one evening. The girl could not hold back her tears and immediately cried. She realized that without her savings she would not be able to pay the monthly amount, and she had no choice but to become the wife of that horrible man. She continued to cry for a while, and then she got to her feet and realized that she needed to go and buy her father some bottles of alcohol, because he had asked her to do so, so she was going to go there. But before she did, she went up to her room and looked at the portrait of her beloved mother. Mentally, she asked her pardon, and afterward took one book out of the dresser that contained entirely her things. In fact, this book was given to her by her mother when she was very young. Lila was incredibly happy to receive it. The girl hugged her as if she were her own and said that she loved the book very much. When she read it, she said that the story was beautiful and added that she would one day become a writer too. Those times were very happy for everyone. When her mother was alive, her father did not drink, but was even happy to have a daughter like Lila. When the mother heard of her daughter's wish, she laughed and said she couldn't wait to read her book. It was fun for everyone. But now Lila sat looking at this beautiful and expensive book and realized that it was the only thing she had left that could still have any value. It won't help their family much. However, perhaps if she got a large sum of money for the book, she could pay off the debt. So, in the dead of night, Lila went to a place where she could turn in the book. She was walking down the street and heading to a bar where she was supposed to buy alcohol. There were drunk but cheerful men in the street who were already going home. As soon as she stepped inside, she saw that everyone immediately turned on her, but she didn't care. She went straight to the bartender, who at that moment was polishing glasses. Lila approached him and asked if he could trade a bottle of alcoholic beverage for this beautiful book. The man was very surprised, but afterward said there was no way he would do such a thing, because he wasn't a pawn shop, so she might as well not even get her hopes up. Layla was in a desperate situation. She started screaming and asked him to take her book because it was worth a lot of money. The man didn't care. He slapped her on the shoulder and told her to get out of his bar. The girl stepped back a little and accidentally tripped. She was about to fall when suddenly a man came up behind her and caught her. He called her Lady Rose and asked if she was all right. The girl, when she heard this, immediately looked up and saw her favorite man, Sylvester. She couldn't believe her happiness, so she stood like that beside him for a while. After that, the girl spoke up and wondered what he was even doing in this bar. Her whole face reddened as she realized how awkward this situation was. The guy was silent for a while, and after that he said that it was his business. He also added that a young woman like her should not be alone in a place like that, so he would like to question what she was doing in the bar. Layla immediately realized that she couldn't tell him that she had only come to exchange the book for alcohol for her father. So, turning around, she just started to run away and said that she would go already. The man was a little surprised by this behavior and asked her to stop, but Layla didn't listen to him at all. Soon she approached the estate, and for a while she hesitated to go inside, for she still hadn't bought her father a new bottle of liquor. She was well aware that her father would be very angry again and try to vent his anger on her. Then, plucking up courage, she opened the door and said in a quiet, trembling voice that she had come home. Her father answered her nothing to this. Then she heard someone in heels coming toward her, and this woman said that the Count had already gone to bed. When Layla turned her head to the side, she saw the girl who had been partying all evening with her father. She immediately said admiringly that this was the girl she had seen earlier. But she didn't say anything and walked toward Layla with quick steps. And after that, in a quiet voice, she asked why she should not work with her since her job paid very well. When Layla heard this, she was immediately very frightened. She knew exactly what this girl was doing, and she didn't want this fate for herself. But the woman kept talking to her and said that even a noble girl like her should know what she meant when she offered a job. The woman explained that with a slacker like her father, it didn't matter at all how hard she worked. He would still continue to drink like nothing happened, and paying off all her debts will remain just a dream. It doesn't matter how long she has worked at her regular job, she will never be able to pay off all her debts because the salary is too small. When Layla heard this, she could not answer her because the woman, smiling, said that her father had been exactly the same, so she understood her perfectly well. Hearing this, Layla looked at the stranger in surprise and asked, "Was her father the same?" The woman replied that they were not rich at all, yet everything was fine, and they had no complaints about life. But despite this, her father sold her anyway to marry her off to an old man so that he could finance their family. However, the old man sold her too, and that's why the girl ended up in that place. After all this, however, she said that such a fate was much better than living with that horrible old man. She earns her fair share, and there's always a bed and a warm meal waiting for her. Sometimes what she does can be painful, but it never hurts too much. The woman said that she was never a noble woman, but when she looks at Layla, she can't help but see the girl she used to be, despite her high status in society. She took her hand and put a business card in it, asking Layla to take it. As soon as Layla read the inscription on the business card, she wondered in surprise who Angelina was. The woman replied that it was her name, and afterward added that calling her an angel working the streets was certainly excessive. But she believed it would all be over soon. She started to leave and said that at least it was better to choose this path of her own free will than to let her father sell her into this job later. Hearing all this, Layla cried again. She ran to her room and looked at the card Angelina had given her for a while. At that moment, the girl remembered the last words of her mother, who had said that her dream was to see Layla one day marry the man she would love. Afterward, she remembered Maximilian's words that if she didn't pay, she would become his wife, and how her father had taken out his anger on her and called her an irresponsible daughter. Poor Layla couldn't understand why she had to endure all this and why it was happening to her. Soon she returned to her room and again saw the mess that remained. She knew perfectly well that she had to clean up as soon as possible. If she didn't, her father would scold her again. So she took off her cloak, picked up her broom, and began to clean up. The first place she went was the living room, where her father was having fun. Then Lila remembered that she also had laundry to do, and she had to go to work early in the morning, so she would have to make her father breakfast beforehand. But at that moment she suddenly remembered that she had completely forgotten about her book, which she had dropped at the bar. This made Lila completely sad. She couldn't understand how she could be so irresponsible and forget a thing that was so dear to her. The girl was on the verge of hysteria. She did not understand what she was doing in this world, because her life was not filled with any joy at all. She dropped the broom and lay on the floor and cried. She felt incredibly bad about all this. The girl couldn't take the strain on herself anymore. She was already wondering if it wasn't better for her to actually take Angelina up on her offer, and if it was her choice. But then suddenly, she realized that she absolutely could not do it, for she would rather die in this place after hard work than go for all that the woman had suggested. If she went to heaven, she might be able to meet her beloved mother again. At that moment, Lila looked out the window and saw the beautiful moon illuminating her room. She looked at her and cried, but soon wished that the next day would never come, that she could go to heaven and meet her mother and not live that fate again. When morning came, everyone in the war tavern was already getting worried because Lila had not arrived, and she was usually the first to arrive. The other waitresses were already getting very worried because the girl hadn't even given any warning that she wasn't coming that day. At that very moment, Maximilian went to a flower store and picked up a great bouquet of flowers. When the salesman saw it, he immediately said that he was in a very good mood and asked, "Would this bouquet be special for someone?" The man smiled happily and said that this would actually be the day he would propose to one beautiful girl. That morning, as usual, Lila's father was sitting in his chair, asleep due to the fact that he had already managed to drink a lot of alcohol since the morning. He had a dream that involved horrible memories from the past, of people rejoicing that the silk factory of the House of Ambrose had finally gone bankrupt. All the people at that time were saying that the Count's fortune had turned upside down in just a moment, and that he was attending illegal gambling, paying women for entertainment and all that. Pretty soon the man woke up from this dream, for he was remembering all the gossip and discussion that had come over him, and it was just killing the man from the inside out. When he woke up, he was very lost for a while, but as he looked around, he realized that he was in familiar surroundings and safe. However, even at that moment, he was already incredibly angry. Soon, Lila woke up to the sun shining directly into her eyes. She fell asleep on the spot where she had been thinking about her life the previous night. It took the girl a while to realize that she had completely overslept, and in fact she should have been at work by now and didn't realize what she was still doing at home. She immediately started packing her bag and realized that if she ran out right away, she might be able to make it at least in time for lunch. And so, as the girl was about to run off to work, her father came into her room and asked her what had happened in that room in the first place. She turned in his direction in surprise, and he took another swing at Lila, asking, hadn't she been able to clean up all this time? He started calling her names, and the girl fell to the ground and cried. She started to apologize to her father and said that she was really sorry, but she just didn't have time. He swung his foot at her and said he was an earl, and wondered if she really thought a man of such status should reside in a filthy room like the one they were in. Lila immediately began to cover her face with her hands. Her father's handbag caught her, and her wristwatch fell out of it. When he saw them, he wondered how she couldn't find time to cook or clean, but always had time to go to her horrible job. Lila didn't know what to say to him. She just sat there with her head down and hoped it would be over soon. But her father only got angrier. He grabbed her by her clothes and lifted her up so that her feet didn't even touch the ground. He wondered if she was going to make a fool of him, and also said that she was just a family member like the rest of them. Lila tried to explain herself, but she didn't know what to say to him, because it was useless. Her father wouldn't listen to her anyway. She recalled a moment from her childhood, how for the first time after her mother died, her grandmother lived with them and also abused her all the time. Grandmother was exactly like Lila's father. She talked about how they had absolutely no money even to buy some food. She called poor little Lila, whose mother had just recently died, a harlot, and said that she and her father were a disgrace to their family. Once her grandmother even kicked her out when she came to ask her for money, and after that she had a very long fight with the man she lived with. That man, when he heard the whole scandal, wondered if she owed Earl Ambrose a favor. After all, he was married to her daughter. But Lila's grandmother told him not to resurrect the past. They could not consort with a man who was in exile and who had dishonored his clan completely. Lila was crying bitterly and begging for the door to be opened. She needed money. She didn't know what to do with her father, but she still thought he was a good man, so she tried to justify him somehow. Soon her father finally let her go and, slapping her in the face, asked why she was looking at him like that. He kept yelling at Lila and talking about how absolutely everyone thinks they have the right to feel sorry for him. He walked forward, memories of all the people who had said something about him popping into his head. When he got close to Lila, he said he was a disgrace to the family and asked if she thought so. He looked absolutely mad and said in a quiet voice that he understood perfectly well that she had exactly that opinion of him. The man kept approaching her with slow steps and said that she liked to look down on him and feel her superiority, that she enjoyed making fun of her poor old father. Lila immediately said that it was all completely wrong, for everything she did was so for him. At that point, the man couldn't take it anymore. He grabbed her by the throat and started choking her, telling her to shut up. He wondered what a silly girl like her could possibly understand. She knew absolutely nothing after all. He continued to scream and strangle his own daughter, telling her that she was just a pain in his eyes, and asked that she no longer dare to tell him that she was only working for him. The girl didn't realize what was even going on, because everything she was doing was really just to bring back the cheerful smile on his face. But now that he says he sees absolutely no payoff from her, Lila wonders what she's been working so hard for all this time. She couldn't believe that her life was really useless and she would get absolutely nothing in return. No thanks for her labors. He continued to strangle his daughter and said she was absolutely just like everyone else. He stopped for a while and suddenly started yelling loudly. He told her to stop and not to look at him like that. At that moment, he squeezed her throat even tighter, and Lila could no longer breathe at all. She was on the verge of death. But at that moment, the door to the room was kicked in, and a young boy took her father away from the girl with a single blow. And that guy happened to be Sylvester. When he was sure that Lila was safe, he took her in his arms and asked if she was all right. Lila was almost unconscious by then. She saw only a distant silhouette that told her to stay awake and not to leave. The girl couldn't understand who it was. The man kept shouting her name. He thought she was about to die, but he hoped for the best, of course. It's been quite a long time since then. After that, Lila finally regained consciousness. She opened her eyes, and the first thing she didn't realize was what was even going on, as well as why she was still in bed. The girl was not embarrassed by anything at all. She immediately sat up and tried to get up, realizing that she had to hurry up because her father would be incredibly angry again for not doing anything around the house. But the moment she tried to become, she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her head and sat back down on the bed, for she had lost her coordination. Sylvester, who had been sitting beside her all this time, immediately jumped up and asked if she was all right, for he saw that she had fallen again. Lila looked to the side at that moment and, seeing the man, wondered in surprise if he was really nearby. The guy immediately said that she should absolutely not even try to get up. Lila was very surprised and asked why that was so. The guy stepped closer to the door and said that her throat must be all dry and asked if she would let him bring her a glass of water. Sylvester also said that he was sure she had a lot of things she wanted to ask him about, but said they would discuss it a little later when she had gotten her strength. Lila, whose head suddenly began to spin violently, realized that this was indeed the right thing to do. Slowly, she began to remember that her father had been incredibly angry and had started choking her in the living room. She suddenly started coughing and felt an incredible pain in her throat. Because of this, Lila remembered that after she had almost passed out because of the lack of oxygen, Sylvester had rushed in and saved her. The girl could not believe that it was all really true, for she had decided that it was only a hallucination. It wasn't long before the man returned to her room again and poured a full glass of water for her to drink. The girl immediately took it in her hand and afterward wanted to ask something about her father. But Sylvester interrupted her and said that she need not worry about him at all, for he was already asleep in his room. Then he laughed nervously and said that he was afraid he had been a little rough on him, but he also apologized for the trouble his father must have caused her. Lila immediately said he didn't have to apologize, and also wondered if she could ask why he was still at the manor. The man set the carafe of water on the bedside table and said he was here to return one thing to her, and at that moment, he pulled out of the drawer something that Lila had come to treasure. At first, she couldn't believe her eyes that it was true. He said she forgot this book at the bar last night, so he came to return it. The girl, when she saw it, was even ready to cry from surprise and happiness. She immediately thanked him and said that the book was very precious to her. She immediately started hugging the book. Then the man, with a smile on his face, said he asked the head cafeteria manager about where she disappeared to, but he said she didn't even show up for work. Sylvester was very surprised and didn't understand how this had happened, since he had literally seen her the previous day. He asked her what her address was, so that he could come and see if everything was all right. Lila, when she heard that it was about the head chief, asked in surprise if he was really worried about her. The man said it was true, and he was very concerned. The man also said that the chief had relayed to him that he had once been the chef at their estate, and Sylvester said that he had no idea that the girl was really a noblewoman. At that moment, Lila was ready to cry. She immediately began to apologize for having to keep this secret for so long, but the man tried to calm her down and replied that she had no need to apologize at all. He then sat down across from her and said he wanted to ask her something, but didn't know if it would be comfortable. At this point, he began to look at the girl. Lila felt a little embarrassed. She kept hugging the book, but still agreed to the question. Looking around, he said he could assume they were in some kind of trouble since she was trying to sell her precious book. And the condition of the estate was not very good, to say the least. The man also said that her father drinks a lot and is completely inadequate. In addition, the girl's pale appearance and her thinness suggest that something very serious may have happened that has shaken their family. So, making a very serious expression on his face, he inquired if she could tell him about it, for perhaps he could help her. The girl felt very uncomfortable because this topic was very painful for her, but still, gathering courage, she told him the whole truth. Lila told him about her father with his alcohol addiction, violent habits, and greatest debts. Sylvester listened to her very carefully and, as if he understood every word, looked very serious indeed. When the girl finally finished, he said that he understood everything and also added that it came as a great shock to him. Sylvester admitted that from the moment she started working in the cafeteria, he never imagined that she had such big problems at home and that she had to endure it all alone. He said she was all alone the whole time and struggled with her father, but in the end, she did the right thing and stayed herself. When Lila heard the words of praise from him, she could no longer hold back her tears and cried. She immediately started apologizing for crying. Sylvester was simply in a panic. He apologized to her for hurting her feelings and also perhaps for saying the wrong thing. But the girl, wiping away her tears, said that it wasn't like that at all. It was just that no one had ever said such words of encouragement to her before, so they cheered her up. She also said that now she finally sees that at least someone appreciates her work and admires what she has to go through. After that, she cried again and said that she was really happy that he finally understood her. Sylvester watched her crying for a while, then stood up and moved closer to her. He put his hand on her back, trying to support her. This made the girl even sadder, and she could no longer hold back her tears. So Lila cried for a long time. After a while, she finally did calm down, and Sylvester, rising from his seat, said that she absolutely shouldn't worry about her father anymore. The man said that he would introduce her to a good rehabilitation center that would help her with this addiction. When Lila heard this, she couldn't believe her ears. She wondered if he would really do that for her. The man said he would, and added that Lila would have to live apart from her father for a while. However, he would pay his entrance fee so she could worry about nothing at all. When Lila heard this, she immediately started interrupting him and said that she had not asked him to do this at all, and added that she would definitely find a way to pay for everything herself. At this point, he began pulling some item out of his pocket and asked if she was going to use the business card he pulled out of his pocket. Sylvester looked directly at her and wondered if she really wanted to find a way this way. The man found it hard to believe that she was willing to go to such lengths, and he said that this business card had fallen out of her pocket when she passed out. He then asked if she even understood what people who work in places like this actually do. Lila was immediately very embarrassed, for she had actually considered starting work there for a moment, but she couldn't say anything back to the man. They were silent for a while. Then Sylvester, sighing heavily, said that if this was really what she wanted to do, he certainly wouldn't stop her. But he wished he could ask her one last time. Was she really willing to sell herself and her body to some strangers just for money? Then Lila couldn't take it anymore. She started screaming loudly and said that it wasn't true at all, and the truth was that she didn't know what to do. The girl explained that if she could not pay this debt that her father had borrowed that day, it would end very badly. At that moment, Maximilian immediately came to her windows. He started shouting loudly and laughing. The guy addressed Lila and said that if she didn't pay his debt right away, she would be obliged to marry him. Of course, Sylvester also heard it. He was very surprised and didn't understand who could even say such things, so he turned around together with Lila to look. Then Maximilian had already managed to get up to her room and, opening the door quickly, replied that it was time for her to pay the bill already. Also, the man said it could be more than just a financial favor. If she did not pay him, he would be happy to have her as his wife. But as soon as he saw Sylvester sitting next to the girl, he was very surprised and didn't understand what was even going on. Maximilian was immediately wary, not understanding what this soldier was doing in his potential future wife's bedroom. Sylvester, however, was looking at him with such a judgmental and serious look that the boy even felt uncomfortable. Maximilian soon came closer and immediately inquired as to who he was in general, as well as his relationship with Lady Lila. The man said nothing to this. He rose from his seat and asked how about he first introduced himself before demanding any answers from others. Maximilian immediately began to fix his hair and, smiling evasively, said his name, and asked the boy to tell him that he had not immediately heard of Volkov's company in his life. But Sylvester was not at all interested in this man, so he turned to the girl and said that he had heard nothing of the sort at all. He then asked Lila if the man was really telling the truth. The girl felt very uncomfortable, for she realized what lay ahead of her, but said that it was true. He had such company. Maximilian immediately pulled out the contract and, pointing it forward, said that, as he could see for himself, he had a contract with Lila, so everything was perfectly legal. Sylvester immediately snatched the paper from his hands, and Maximilian turned his attention to the girl, who lowered her gaze and avoided him. He also thought of how she was a stubborn idiot, just like her father, who would fight to the last, even though she knew ahead of time that it wouldn't work. However, Maximilian was very happy that when she finally became his, he would be able to get a title of nobility, and he would just use her as his ticket into noble society. Without thinking long, the boy stepped closer to Lola and put his arm around her waist, pulling her closer to him. The man, smiling nastily, said that if she married him, all her problems would immediately disappear and she could think of no more financial difficulties. Maximilian was well aware that she was very thin as a stick and thin. However, he didn't care. He was going to have fun with her when they first got married and then just throw her out like a used thing. The man was really going to marry her, use her, and afterward get himself a mistress with whom he could have fun. At this point, he whispered that he loved Lila very much, but of course that was not true. Then Sylvester suddenly came close to him and grabbed him by the shoulder and pulled him away from the girl. He said that she didn't belong to him at all, so he had no right to be so handsy. Maximilian, of course, was very indignant. He wanted to object to something, but when he saw the stern expression on the warrior's face, he changed his mind. He turned to Lila and inquired as to the whereabouts of the installment she was supposed to pay him this month. Lila said nothing to him. She immediately looked away and realized that very soon her life would be even worse than it had been before. Maximilian at this point smugly continued to smile and realized that very soon he would be very rich. And Sylvester, however, at this point put the papers in the guy's hand and told him that he had paid for everything and asked if it was true that the contract did not specify who was to pay. The man, when he heard about it, was very surprised and asked, "Did the guy really pay for Lila?" The amount there was not a small sum, so Maximilian did not understand how a complete stranger could pay the entire monthly fee for a girl like Lila. He'd already planned the whole wedding, as well as the better life that would come after Lila would default on her debt. The moment he felt that his chance was flying away, he immediately pounced on the soldier and inquired how such a simple soldier could pay off the incredibly large debt owed. He also wondered where he was trying to screw him over. Maximilian got so angry that he even grabbed the guy by the shirt near his throat. Sylvester acted completely calm for a while and said that it wasn't a hoax at all. The man also said that if he was indeed a businessman, in which case he must have heard something about the Friedel family. As soon as Maximilian heard this surname, he immediately let go of the soldier's throat and inquired, "Is it really him?" Sylvester, adjusting his uniform, said that it was indeed so. He gave his name and also his surname, which was of the noble Friedel family. When Lila heard about all this and saw the frightened look on Maximilian's face, she was very surprised. She couldn't even imagine that the man had such a powerful family. Maximilian dropped the paper at this point and began to back away with slow steps. He said that he couldn't just believe it, and also talked about how it wasn't true. However, Sylvester moved closer to him and took the papers and replied that if he didn't believe him so much, they could safely go to the military base in Ulkal Sarat and check everything. He also added that once they were in that place, they could stop at the military law office to verify the validity of this contract from Maximilian. And after waving the paper right in front of the man's face, Sylvester also said that of course they would check everything, even down to the smallest stamp. The guy was just incredibly scared. He said in a shaky voice right away that he absolutely didn't need it. He took the paper from his hands and also said that the contract had been signed by mutual agreement of both parties, so he saw no reason to check anything else. But Lila, who was standing between the two men, listened intently to everything and immediately realized that Maximilian must have involved some illegal terms in this contract. The man immediately turned to her, hoping that she could back him up and tell him that this was indeed the case, but the girl only turned away without saying anything to him. When the guy saw this, he became even more angry. He didn't understand why the head of the Friedel family had given such a great servant to such a shameful house that was no longer capable of anything. Of course, if Sylvester hadn't come to Lila's rescue, she would now be Maximilian's wife, and everything would be right on track. He thought about various things for a while, but then he suddenly began to laugh loudly and said that he understood everything. He now knew why Sylvester was so eager to help Lady Lila. He said that the two of them were quite alone in the room at this time of night, and rejoicing, Maximilian said that he thought so, that it was all for a reason. Lila didn't understand what was even going on, and the guy continued his dirty fantasies and wondered if she was really going to sell herself to a man. He also said that sleeping with a soldier was certainly the best way to make money, but also to embarrass himself even more. By pretending to be a noble lady, she could ask for double the amount, so Maximilian was very pleased with his assumptions. He continued even though Sylvester was already on edge. The man spoke of how he would have saved her with just a word. But surely Sir Friddle must be enjoying it all very much, for she was a young lady who was giving herself completely to him. Maximilian wondered if it was true that the only thing she was good at was seducing men and fulfilling absolutely all their desires. Lila just felt humiliated. She was in a panic, but she tried not to show it on her face, so she remained silent the whole time and only stood with her head down. But then suddenly, Sylvester came up to her and, putting his arm around her hair, told her that he would not allow a man to slander the completely innocent Lady Lila any longer. And all because she is his fiancée. When Maximilian heard this, he was so surprised that he even opened his mouth a little. He froze in place and couldn't believe it was really true, and Lila herself hadn't expected to hear such a thing. She immediately looked toward Sylvester and asked, "Am I really his bride now?" But the man said nothing, but took a strand of her hair and kissed her. The girl didn't understand what was even going on, nor did she understand since when she was anyone's fiancée at all. But whatever the case, this man had saved her. When she further questioned why he had decided she would be his bride, the man immediately told her to play along with him in front of Maximilian because that was such a strategy. But in fact, Lila could not think that it was all a hoax, because the man played so professionally that she already believed in these words herself. When Maximilian came to his senses, he immediately turned to Lila and told her that she had absolutely never said she was betrothed. Sylvester put his arm around her waist and calmly began to talk about how she was just very easily embarrassed, which was probably why she didn't talk about such a thing. He also added that she asked him to keep their betrothal secret until their wedding day, and that she wanted to earn her own savings to contribute to their ceremony. Lila pulled a fake smile onto her face, and she didn't realize how he could make it all up so well and say it so believably. But Sylvester at this point took her hand and kissed it, saying she was an incredibly hard-working, humble young woman, and also called her the dearest sunshine. When Lila heard all this, she only looked at him in surprise and couldn't understand what was going on. But then she suddenly realized that the pause had gone on a little longer, and immediately thanked him for it. Maximilian at this moment stood absolutely shocked at what was happening, and did not know if it was all true, for they were both playing quite believably. Sylvester said nothing for a while. Then he turned to the lad and said that now that he knew the whole truth, it was requested that he stop already and rethink everything he had said before. He also said that if Maximilian valued his life, he should never again enter their private rooms, much less the grounds of the domain, for otherwise he would certainly not be able to get by with a simple conversation. The guy was so angry that he immediately started yelling loudly and said that this was absolutely not the last time they would see him. And he also asked that they memorize it, and after that he walked out the door very quickly and started walking away to see what had even happened. Lila at this point continued to stand and hold Sylvester's hand. When the door closed, they let go, and she thanked him in a trembling voice. The man immediately replied that she didn't have to thank him at all, because everything was fine. He also said that he could tell from her facial expression that something was still bothering the girl, so he asked what it was. Lila put her head down and said in a quiet voice that it wasn't, but after thinking for a bit, she said that just if Volkov found out that their betrothal was a lie, she was sure he would try to get back at them all for it. Stepping further away from the man, she said that was what bothered her, because Volkov was capable of a lot of things. Sylvester, upon hearing this, immediately thought about it and said that he understood everything. But then he came up with one very good idea on how to get out of such a situation. The man turned to Lila and told her that if she was okay with everything, he would like to actually marry her. When the girl heard this, she started looking at him in surprise and asked him what he was even saying. The man said in a calm voice that if she married him, she would receive his surname accordingly. But he would demand nothing more from her. This marriage would be quite the same as one of convenience. When Lila heard this, she immediately hesitated. She wondered if he would really be satisfied with it, since she could give him absolutely nothing in return. The man immediately smiled and, waving his hand, told her not to worry, for the fact that she would be safe was enough for him. He also said that he is at an age where all his relatives are trying to find a wife for him. He also added that he knows very well that she won't act like his previous fiancés and break their engagement at the sight of his face, so he can absolutely not worry. Lila, upon hearing this, immediately said that of course she would never do such a thing, so he might as well not be afraid. Sylvester explained that this way she would be able to pay for all her debts and would also be free from her family's crimes. He extended his hand forward to her and wondered if this wasn't a beautiful proposal for the two of them. He is also getting his own benefit from this wedding. Also, Sylvester promised that he will provide a good life for her father. He will go to a rehabilitation center, and there they will stop drinking, and in this way, they will fix their lives. Layla was silent for a while. Then she took his hand and said she would gladly accept such a fine offer from him. Afterward, he inquired what her real full name was, for he was really curious. Then the girl said her name was Layla Elrose Ambrose. Of course, he needed to know that in order to propose. And at the same moment, getting down on one knee, he addressed her by her full name and asked if she would do him the honor of becoming his wife, if only temporarily. And Sylvester also added that as her husband, even for a short time, he vows that he won't have anyone else on the side. Some time passed from then on, and eventually their wedding was set for a date 2 months later. Sylvester eventually paid off their family's debts, and her father left the estate for a rehab center to finally get his old self back. At the time of their marriage, the man planned to take Ambrose's last name and live on their estate, so she devoted all her time to self-improvement so as not to embarrass her new husband. Soon they began to pick out a beautiful new dress for Layla. The maid had chosen an incredibly beautiful lush pink dress that matched her hair very well. The maid said that the pale pink really goes with her face, so she looks ravishing. Sylvester, who also came to see the dress, said that it really did. When Layla heard all this, she was so embarrassed that her face even turned a little red. From that moment on, she began to wear such dresses often and to take special lessons. The man had hired a tutor for her, who talked about how she should know how to behave at balls, for from the moment she married him, that she would attend them often. The woman also taught her that the left hand should be placed on top of the man's right hand. They taught this lesson for a very long time, showing in great detail how to stand, speak, and dance properly. Layla's evenings were mostly etiquette lessons. The older woman taught them, even though the girl was already exhausted from the day's work. In one of the classes, the instructor said that she should realize that it was the wife's responsibility to entertain her new husband on their wedding night. She also said that it can be a little painful. However, she needs to be confident in her partner and know that nothing bad will happen. The teacher also talked about how if her feelings were genuine, pretty soon it would be the greatest pleasure of her life, so it would just take some getting used to. When Layla heard this, she immediately thought about her feelings for Sylvester. She thought about the fact that since he was willing to marry her, maybe he could find the true her. Thus, the time flew by until their wedding. For Layla, they picked up an incredibly beautiful wedding dress, which was very lush, and for the man, a white military suit, which also perfectly matched him. When the ceremony was over, he pulled the girl closer to him and, removing her veil from her face, told her that he must now kiss her. Layla immediately blushed with embarrassment, for it was her first kiss. However, she felt very much at ease. Soon, when all the official ceremony and celebration was over, they returned to the manor. It was getting dark outside, and it was time to go to bed. The man went into the bedroom and immediately began to undress, when suddenly he heard someone knocking on his door. Sylvester went over at once, and when he opened the door, he was very much surprised, for right in front of him stood Layla. The girl was again very embarrassed and felt very uncomfortable. She was in her nightclothes and looked at him with her beautiful blue eyes. He looked at her in surprise and immediately wondered what she was doing in his bedroom so late at night, for he had assumed she was tired too and would go to bed. Then the girl, stammering, said that it was their first wedding night after all, so she thought she should do it. Gaining courage, Layla touched his hand and said they should do all the things that all newlyweds usually do. However, the man was so angry that he punched her on the arm and threw her aside. He said that he was not interested in young girls like her. Sylvester also asked that she not think there was any reason why he married her, and it certainly wasn't to spend the wedding night with her. He then slammed the door loudly behind him, and Layla was left standing in her nightgown all alone in the darkness. She was ready to cry, but of course the girl was well aware that he would absolutely not want to do that to her, so she had to expect that answer. The man at this moment sat down on the couch and also blushed all over. For a while he pondered various things, and then the special bell rang. Then the butler came to Sylvester. He turned to the man and wondered if something had happened, for he did not usually call on him so late. Sylvester, rising to his feet, said that he was returning to his family's estate immediately. When the butler heard this, he was very surprised and asked him what he was saying. And the man said that he had heard everything correctly, and also asked him to prepare everything. Layla was back in her dark bedroom at this point, sitting on her bed with her legs tucked under her. She was crying, of course, for she was very hurt after what had happened. Some time had passed since then, and since their wedding night itself, Sylvester had never returned to the manor, so Layla thought herself the very real idiot who had ruined everything. She thought about the fact that she didn't understand at all the reasons why he treated her so kindly, and when he didn't even want to spend the night with her, it confused her even more. One morning when the girl woke up, she was spending time at her mother's book. It had been a whole 3 months since they'd started living apart, so Layla had nothing to do but think about the bad. She was well aware that it was a marriage of convenience, but if they divorced, she would have to live off her own earnings. So Layla knew that she needed to start preparing on her own as soon as she could, but she also realized that she could no longer hide her identity and work on par with ordinary people. Then the girl looked at the book she held in her hands and remembered a moment from her childhood when she told her mother that one day she would become a writer the whole world would know about. Layla pondered for a while longer, when suddenly there was a knock at her room. She opened the door at once and saw a servant girl holding a piece of paper. The girl immediately inquired about it, and the maid replied that next week there would be an opportunity for officers' wives to volunteer, and inquired if the girl would participate. When Layla heard about it, she immediately picked up the paper and began to study it. She had never heard of such a thing before. The maid at that moment immediately explained that they would be distributing bread to the women in the slum to help out a little. As soon as Layla heard about the slums, she immediately agreed because she herself lived in terrible conditions, so she was eager to go and help the poor people. Volunteers had organized a whole stall to distribute food to the needy, and Layla was in it. When a little girl approached her, she handed her a bag of food, but when she saw her bulging belly, she was very surprised. This little girl looked even younger than Layla herself and already pregnant, and this girl was incredibly shocked because she is still a child herself. The girl, Leosha, took the bag of food and left. And Layla thought at that moment that if Sylvester hadn't come to save her, maybe she wouldn't be any different from all these people. As she looked at the poor, starving women, she thought about how she wanted to do more than just share food. She felt she had to help them in some way. Suddenly, some girl came up to them, and seeing Layla, she immediately addressed her, and afterward inquired whether she was not the noblewoman. As soon as Layla looked up upon hearing the familiar voice, she immediately saw Miss Angelina in front of her, the very woman who had entertained her father and given her the dreaded business card. The girl was very frightened. However, Angelina, smiling happily, said that she had not seen her for quite some time. At that moment, Layla was approached by another volunteer and asked if the woman was a friend of hers. The girl immediately apologized and asked if she could step back for a moment to have a word with the woman. Ta said that of course she could take her time and stay as long as she needed to, since they were basically doing fine as it was. They stepped aside with Angelina, and the latter, turning to Layla, said that this count had never called her again. So she wondered what had happened to the two of them. Layla was about to say something when the girl interrupted her and laughed, saying that she seemed to already know, and asked if it was true that she had married the head of Friedel. Lila immediately panicked and asked the girl how she even knew about it, and Angelina, with a wink, replied that she didn't need to know about it at all. The girl did not pursue the subject further. Then Lila, with her head down, said that she had come to this place to do charity work with other military wives. Almost with tears in her eyes, she said she absolutely can't help but think that if she hadn't gotten a grip on her head and something had gone wrong, she would have ended up just like them. So the girl also said that she would like to do absolutely anything she can for these people. Angelina listened to her and thought for a while, and then said that if that was really what she thought, in which case there was no point in distributing bread to them in that way. The girl was immediately surprised and wondered what she should do in such a case, for she could not sit idly by. The woman then explained that in order to get out of this hell, plain old bread, which would only fill her stomach for one night, would be completely insufficient. Angelina explained that there are only a few jobs in this country that women can go to in order to make even minimum wage. However, she herself realized that they had to do something about it, for the women in this town only knew how to sell themselves to earn a few coins to buy themselves something to eat. She said that if someone would show them that there was another way for them to survive, then a whole new world of possibilities would open up to them, and they would find their happiness one day. When Lila heard this, she took the words absolutely seriously. She realized that she had felt the same power as the day Angelina had approached her at the manor. But even though a lot of bad things had happened to her, she was still a pretty good woman. So Lila came close to her, took her hand, and asked her if she wanted to be her servant at the manor.